Welcome to the Vineyard Church podcast. For more information, visit us at vkcwest.com.
We're going to be looking at the life of Joseph today, and Joseph is a story that many of us are familiar with, but having said that, the opening couple of chapters of the story of Joseph are PG-13. And so as parents in the room, we're going to talk about some things that are in the scriptures, in the text, that you just discern what kind of conversations you want to have on the drive home. So some people perked up, some people are like, uh-oh, you know. So, but the Bible, one of the things that we've seen throughout this series is that actually there are these themes that go through the book of Genesis, and they're themes about like the goodness that God creates the world with, but then how all throughout this goodness that he creates, people use their freedom and their choice to sort of choose broken ways of living. And some of those broken ways of living actually get passed down from like generation to generation within the family. People like hand this brokenness down generationally. But another theme that we see is as people are broken, trying to live in relationship with God, God continues to show up in the brokenness. And instead of like just abandoning or rejecting people, he actually moves closer to them in relationship. And he continues to not only like work on restoring the relationship with them, but also he continues to like use them. It's this confounding thing. We're not quite sure why God does it, but instead of him just personally doing everything, it's like he works through the lives of broken people to accomplish the things that he actually intends to do in this great redemptive story that he's been telling. We see that story like come to fruition in the life of Jesus and the unfolding of the church, and now we sit here living lives sort of with this offering of a life with God because of all these times. Then instead of pushing people away because they were broken, God throughout the story of scriptures draws near and moves with grace. Those themes are kind of like all throughout the book of Genesis, and we'll see those things today. One of the things that we see as far as like families handing things down, we see in Abraham's interactions with God. God makes this covenant with Abraham, and essentially it has a few parts to it. He says this, like, Abraham is a man who sort of doesn't know who God is or what God's like, and God sort of steps into Abraham's story and says this, hey, I'm actually going to make a covenant with you, a promise with you, that you're going to have descendants, that I'm going to give you a place to live, and I'm going to live in relationship with you and all the family that comes after you. And this promise that God makes gets handed down from like generation to generation through Abraham's family. But it's not the only thing that gets handed down through the family lineage. You see, some of you guys who've been here for like the last several weeks have seen this. Like Abraham's family has some brokenness that keeps showing up generation after generation after generation. Have you noticed that Abraham's family like struggles with honesty? Like the grandfather tells a lot of lies, and the father tells a lot of lies, and the kids seem to tell a lot of lies. It's like lying, deceiving, tricking, makes it all through this family story. It's like honesty is something that apparently is not like getting handed down generation to generation. We also see that there's brokenness around sex and sexual relationships. Like the way that they're living has this brokenness around their sexuality. And you see like the same mistakes that the grandfather makes, well, like the father makes, and then the sons make. And that sort of brokenness gets sort of handed down generation after generation. We see this trend of something that gets handed down of like half obedience to God, right? Like God says, hey, go to this place. And then Abraham goes like most of the way to that place and sets up camp sort of in between kind of thing. And we see all throughout the family story, people do like sort of what God says, but not exactly what God says. And that gets handed down generation to generation. And finally, we see violence in this family. Like a lot of things are solved. A lot of things are brought to an end through violence. and it sort of perpetuates itself through this family line. And it's amazing because you would think if God was interacting with people that had all this brokenness and they just kept handing it from generation to generation, that he would go, got the wrong family, I'm moving on to some like other people. I'm going to try this thing again with a different group. But instead, like his grace, people say that the Old Testament is full of like God's judgment or that kind of thing. But actually all throughout it, it's like the brokenness of people is encountered with God, not drawing away from people, but drawing near to people. His grace is like all throughout the thing. There's this other really unique thing that we see that gets handed down from generation to generation in Abraham's family, and it's this, that they seem to hear from God in visions and dreams. Have you noticed this? Like every generation has these unique encounters with God where God shows them something about his redemptive plan and what he wants to do. And it would be kind of like impossible for us to talk about the life of Joseph without taking some time to look at the role that dreams play. It's like every scene of Joseph's life is moved forward by God showing him something in a dream. And then the thing doesn't come true in exactly the way that he thinks it will. Dreams are a fascinating thing for us as Western people. We like to think of ourselves as very like rational, very logical. Things like emotions, we try and just sort of put back here on the back burner and live more logic-oriented lives, ways that are reasonable, ways that make sense. It never quite works. Our emotions end up hijacking us most of the time. But we like to think of ourselves as very like logical, reasonable, rational. We live in a Western enlightened world, right? But the fascinating thing is that dreams are something that are so commonly experienced in our human condition that to not interact with what they are and how they might be useful to the God that made us would be silly. I had this moment. I worked for a company doing like culture and leadership development training with leaders all at a bunch of sites all over the Midwest and the Southwest. And so I work with leaders in that place. And one of the things that we do as like one of the four sort of divisions of the company is we sell a lot of construction machinery. And specifically, we bought this building in Garden City, Kansas that was massive in order to open a Kubota dealership in Garden City, right? Selling agricultural and construction equipment out of this thing. But we bought it, but the people who we were buying it from needed it for like another 12 months before they moved into their next place, essentially. And so there was this, we'd set up half of this massive building for the work that we were doing, but then we had this other half of the building that we really didn't have access to because they were running a business out of it. And they had moved out, and so I'm with a team of leaders out there, and we're supposed to be envisioning, hey, what will we use the other side of this facility for as far as growing the business, growing the company? What kinds of activities could we do that would, be a good use of the resource that we have in this space, in this place? And so I'm with a group of about maybe 8 people, I think, and we start walking through this part of the building that we'd never been allowed into before. And as we're walking through it, like you open up a door you haven't been able to open because there's been people behind it. And we walk in and we're like, oh my goodness, like this shop space is massive. And then we're like, well, what's through that door? And we walk through that door and it's another shop. And we're like, the opportunity, we're all just, we start thinking and envisioning the sorts of stuff we could do. And we're like, well, what's through there? And we walk through there and it's just like offices and offices and offices. And we walk through those offices and open another door and there's more meeting rooms and more offices. And we're just like looking at each other, laughing because we're just thinking of like all the space constraints we have in our Kansas City like branches. And this place is like massive and it seems to just keep going on. And at one point I turn to the guys and I go, okay, have you guys ever had that dream where you're like in a house and you keep opening doors and there keeps being more rooms in that house? Have you guys had this dream? I'm just curious. Raise your hand if you've had that dream. Okay, we're going to do a lot of this interacting, so just get used to it. So here's the funny thing. There's like 8 of us. 6 of the guys go like, oh my gosh, I've had that dream so many times. And 2 of the guys are like, I don't know what you're talking about. But I start like looking at these guys going, wait a minute, like, it's a dream, but it's like commonly held among, like, it's such a specific thing, but we all have this dream about a place where there's rooms and then there's more rooms and there's more rooms. And it started me thinking like, that's not the only dream that is shared sort of commonly among people. So we're going to do a little like, what's your dream life look like today? So get your hands ready to raise or not raise, and then judge the people next to you. So here's a dream. Tell me if you've had this one. This one is really common. These are some of the most commonly held, like psychologists have studied these dreams because they're so common to our human experience. You ever have a dream where you're just going about your day-to-day life and all of a sudden like a tooth falls out? Anybody? Or clumps of hair just start falling out? That kind of thing? Anybody? Raise your hand if you've had it. Judge the people next to you. Okay, perfect. That dream is incredibly common. Here's another one. Have you ever had the dream where you find yourself like drowning, but then all of a sudden you breathe in and you're like, I can breathe underwater. Have you had this? Anyone? So my father has. That's where I get it from. So that one is related to stress and anxiety, they say. Have you ever had the dream that you find yourself like walking in a dream and then you're bouncing and then you're like, I'm weightless, and then you fly? Anyone have the weightless dream? All right, that one's common. Anyone have this one? You're falling from a great height and right before you hit the floor, bam, you wake up with a jerk and your spouse mocks you. Anybody have this one? Okay, yeah. Common, right? And then have you had this one? You're either in a meeting or there's an intruder in the house or some sort of situation and you open your mouth to speak and nothing comes out. You have this one? That one's awful. Here's one that is common among people. Are you starting to notice, how is it possible we're all sharing these dreams? Have you ever had this dream where you find yourself in front of people speaking and you realize I don't have notes or anything prepared to say, and then you look down and you're in your underwear. Or worse, in your nunderwear. You had this dream? Anyone? The public speaking sort of dream? Here's the thing. Psychologists have studied the way that the mind actually we have these conscious realities that we live in, but underneath the surface, there's this thing that's sort of churning and needing, our emotional world or how we feel about life needs to be processed. And here's the truth. Tell me if you feel like this is true of you and your world. In the Western world, we spend a quarter to a third of our life sleeping. Right, somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. But the other 2/3, we fill with busyness and noise and hurry and meetings and sports events and all kinds of activity and busy noise to where many times you reach the end of the day and you have not processed any of what you experienced in life. Anyone have that? Come on. This is our Western cultural rhythm. And then we find ourselves asleep, and there's things that apparently we need to process about the pace and the hurry and the craziness of life that we're living in. There are these other dreams. Now here's where it sort of takes a turn into the world of Joseph. There are these other dreams that are far more specific. Have you ever had a dream about somebody in your life being in trouble or having relational dysfunction or being in danger or something like that, and you wake up sort of concerned for them, and then over the next period of time, that thing that you dreamed about ends up unfolding in there? Anyone had this? Where it's oh, that's not that one was specific. That's not one of these shared dreams that's generalized anxiety. That's being clued into something. There are these dreams that are so specific that they actually have a lot to do with who we are. And when we look at the book of Genesis related to Joseph, he has some very specific dreams. And here's some of the underlying things that Genesis has set in place before Joseph starts these dreams. We have a God who speaks, who's actively involved with human beings, who busy themselves with the things of life. And if God is going to get any space to talk, sometimes he does it when we're not awake. God actually interacts with people in whatever space or margin he can in life. And Joseph specifically has these visions, these dreams from the Lord about the future that God has for him in life. And here's the thing. If God needs our attention in life, he'll get it one way or another. So as we start looking through this thing, one of the things that we'll see a few specific themes emerge. One of them is the way that God uses dreams to guide and direct Joseph in his journey. And it may not be that different from the way God would like to guide and direct us if we made space for him in our life. We see God's favor in Joseph's life, regardless of his circumstances, and we see a family system that's broken and how God starts to work within this family to address some things that have been handed down over and over again. So those are some of the things we'll look at. I think Cody maybe shared this last week, that God may be in our heart, but grandpa's in our bones, right? There's a lot of things that we inherit, but God doesn't just want to leave those things sitting there broken in our world. So we're going to start in chapter 37. If you brought your Bibles, you can use those, but it'll also be up on the screen. This is how the story of Joseph begins in Genesis. It says this: So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. And this is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended to his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers and the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. Not many kids name that these days. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Nobody told Joseph snitches get stitches. We'll find out how that unfolds throughout the story. Verse 3, Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, this beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph more and more because their father loved him more than the rest of them, and they wouldn't say a kind word to him. And here's where Joseph's story makes this first sort of family mistake of pride. Verse 5, one night Joseph had a dream. And when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. He said this: listen to this dream. We were out in the field, tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly, my bundle stood up, and all your bundles gathered around and bowed low before me. Cool. His brothers responded, so you think you'll be our king, do you? Do you actually think you'll reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the ways he talked about him. And verse 9 says this: soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. Listen, I had another dream. The sun and the moon and 11 stars, 11 brothers, 11 stars, they're picking up on what he's doing here, all bowed low before me. And this time he told the dream to his father as well, but his father scolded him and said this: what kind of dream is that? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow low to the ground before you? But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant. Here's some things just in this opening section of Joseph's story that we're not supposed to miss. We are special to God. We do have a God who speaks, who knows the plans that he has for our lives. God does actually have good things in store, but here's the place where Joseph gets something wrong. If it's really the plans that God has for our life, it's not just about us. Joseph, in his lack of wisdom, sort of goes, hey, listen to how special I am. God talked to me. But he misses the part where anything that God might do through his life, some things are just better kept between God and us, to watch, to wait, to see what he'll do as the story of our life unfolds. And if God makes a promise, he's gonna keep it. But he won't keep it. Here's the truth that I have learned over the course of my life. Maybe it's true for you. Has God ever kept a promise to you, but none of the way that you got to him keeping that promise looked like what you cooked up in your brain? Yes. Anybody? Yeah, me. Me too. See, here's the thing. Wise people understand that when God plants a dream in your heart, or he shows you a way he wants to use you in your life, you hold that thing in awe and wonder, and you just wonder how he will accomplish it, and you stop trying to cook up ways for God to do the thing that he said. Well, God, listen, I told you you told me what you want to do with my life. Well, now that I'm very important, let me tell you how to accomplish that. Here's the thing. a lot of us interact with the things that are spoken over our lives by people in prayer or the ways that we hear God's voice. And we sort of like do it like somebody standing at the base of a mountain, and you want to get to you see what God showed you about the top of the mountain. And you're like, well, here's the deal, God, my game plan, teleportation. And God goes, my game plan, switchbacks. We're going to go back and forth and back and forth, and we're slowly going to make progress toward the thing the promise I will keep. I promise I'll keep it. I always do what I say, but we're going to actually, here's the truth. When God speaks about calling in our lives, he is every bit as interested in the character he forms in us than the things he will do through us. And that's why the path never looks exactly like what we would cook up, is because we like the path where we get to the end result and not the path of the hard work of character building. Does this make sense to anyone else? You notice when it doesn't go the way you cooked it up in your brain, that God actually shaped something in your life through the disappointment or the character or the circumstances? But 17-year-old Joseph does not know that. And so he just acts, he hears from God, he acts proud and special, and this is his brother's response. His brothers are over it. And so Joseph comes to check on him again. They're out, not in the field that they should be. He's out getting ready to tattle and run back to dad. And they see him coming at a distance. They see him because of his fancy pants coat, right? And they start cooking up a plan. Here's the deal. We're over it. We're just gonna kill him. We're done with this. Remember, violence is handed down throughout this family as a brokenness. One of the brothers, a man named Reuben, who one day would have a delightful sandwich named after him, realizes this can't happen. And so he talks to the brothers and he goes, listen. We'll just throw him in a pit, and then we'll all leave and we'll just see what happens to him. And Reuben, the story says, knows that he's going to go back and take care of Joseph, right? He's going to get him out. Well, he'll learn a lesson in that pit. He'll learn snitches get stitches. And then I'll bring him back to the family, and he'll know, you do not mess with us and tattle to dad anymore. This is what's going on in Reuben's mind. Everyone else wants to kill him, and Reuben's thinking, this is how we're going to solve this. Well, Reuben leaves. The brothers see Ishmaelite traders walking through, and they're like, wait a minute, why would we kill him when we could make some money off this dude? And they sell their brother into slavery instead of putting him to death. Reuben then comes back to find an empty well. And this is the story the brothers bring back to their father, verse 31. Then the brothers killed a young goat, dipped Joseph's robe in the blood, and sent the beautiful robe to their father with this message: look what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son? And their father recognized it immediately. Yes, he said, it's my son's blood. A wild animal must have eaten him. And Joseph has clearly been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes and dressed himself in burlap. And he mourned deeply for a long time for his son. And his family all tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, I will go to my grave mourning for my son. He would say this and then he would weep. Meanwhile, the Midianite traders arrived in Egypt, and they sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and Potiphar was the captain of his palace guards. Joseph's brothers intend to kill him for his pride, his arrogance. He's sold into slavery, and he's taken to a place where he never would have gone on his own. Things were good in his father's house. Why leave your father's house? He gives you fancy clothes and treats you better than everyone else. In no other way was God going to get Joseph out of his father's house and the comfort of that place into another place. In no other way but pain and brokenness and hardship was this thing going to unfold. See, even in Joseph's brokenness and pride, God knows the calling and the plans that he has for Joseph's life. And God moves with grace. Even though Joseph's been proud, God doesn't just discard him. God moves into that place and says, look, I know the plans I have for you. And he puts him, it's switchbacks, right? He puts him in a place he never would have thought his journey would take him. God places him in this place where his character is going to be formed. Now, an interesting thing happens. That's chapter 37, right? An interesting thing happens. It's like a movie scene where you're following the main character and all of a sudden you jump over to a side character. And in chapter 38, we see a really broken story. Like Joseph's sort of core issue might have been pride, let's say. But his brother has a whole different core issue that comes through the family story. And this is the one where things get a little like PG-13. It's the story of Tamar. So Joseph has this brother, Judah. You sometimes would have heard it sung, our God is the Lion of Judah. He's fighting our battle. Like Jesus, this like person Jesus from the tribe of Judah. This is the Judah that tribe would flow from. He's one of the brothers. And Judah has this responsibility as the head of a family that if any of the women lose their husbands die or pass away, that he would bring them into his family through marriage. And this woman named Tamar loses her spouse, and Judah, instead of caring for her, he just goes, nah, not my problem. He has this social responsibility to be a kinsman redeemer, to keep her as a part of the family, to protect her. Widows in this culture are incredibly vulnerable. And he's just like, nah, I'd just rather not. He shirks his responsibility, and she's now going to be vulnerable. But here's the thing. He's got this like broken sexuality in what he's inherited through the family. His relationship with females is just a mess, apparently. So here's the thing. Tamar, knowing that this is a mess, does this bizarre thing, places herself on the way to a party he's going to. He propositions her and sleeps with her. And then he's like, oh, wait, I don't have money to pay you. And so his solution to this, I mean, this is messed up stuff, right? This is like, the Bible is full of like really broken people doing really broken things. His solution is this. He's like, I'm going to give you my like forms of identification. So he gives her like his credit card, his social number, and his mom's maiden name, right? And he goes on and says, when I come back, I'll get my forms of ID and I'll pay you and the whole thing. Well, he leaves and he comes back and she's gone. And he's so humiliated and embarrassed that somebody's stolen his identity and that this is a thing that he's engaged, this brokenness is a thing that he's engaged in. He just like hides it and doesn't tell anyone. Now here's the duplicity of Judah in his life. He's got this like judgment as an undercurrent in him. Because about 3 months later, we find out that Tamar is pregnant. And what is his response? Like, this is a guy that has sexual brokenness as a part of his life. What's his response to finding out that Tamar has slept with someone? He's like, well, we're putting her to death. Do you see the duplicity in that? Have you ever had these places in your life where like something is broken in you, and then when you see the brokenness in somebody else, it like is super gross? And you kind of lash out against it? This is kind of what's happening in him. He's like, well, we're putting her to death. Culturally, I mean, it was a scandalous thing, right? And so they come to actually like carry out this punishment, and she just goes, oh, by the way, they're your kids, and here's the credit card, and here's the social security number, and your mother's maiden name. And this thing like breaks in Judah, that we'll look at how God starts to actually like, he becomes aware of how broken he is, and we'll see in the story in the chapters to come how God actually redeems it and restores who he is and like breaks that family brokenness off of him. But he realizes in this moment, like, look, I'm the kind of is it. I'll talk loud for us. What was I talking about here? The kind of guy who sells slavery of a person, and he starts to tune in to this way that his brokenness has impacted people. He becomes aware of it. And come it's not quite the not
Check.
First time using a microphone. All right, so here we go. You guys didn't know you were coming to a comedy. So what we see then is it jump cuts from this story about Judah realizing his brokenness and realizing what God needs to get a hold of in him, in his family story. And it cuts back to this story of Joseph. Chapter 39, we start to see that God is shaping not only the calling on Joseph's life through where God takes him, but also his character. And it says this: when Joseph was taken back to Egypt by Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. And Potiphar was the captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And the Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of the Egyptian master. And Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything that he did. And this pleased Potiphar. And so soon he made Joseph his personal attendant, and he put him in charge of his entire property. And the Lord began to bless Potiphar for Joseph's sake, and all of his household affairs ran smoothly. And his crops and his livestock flourished. And Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything that he owned. He's the COO of Potiphar's house, who is one of the most important people to the Pharaoh in Egypt, right? So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. And with Joseph there, he didn't have to worry about a thing except for what food to eat. If you're the CEO, this is the guy you're looking for. Here's the thing. In the switchbacks of life, God remains with Joseph where he's taking him. And here's the thing that's true. If you've ever found yourself in a place where you're like, I don't know why God would put me in this place. Here's what God loves to do with people that follow him, that he puts somewhere. He loves to bless the lives of other people he intends to love. I've noticed this in my life working in the business world. Like I had been a pastor at this church in the Northland for a period of time, and then I start doing leadership development and training in the business world, and all of a sudden, it's like God dropped a Jesus-following person into a workplace, and we start talking about leadership and character formation and how these guys navigate their relational worlds. And every now and again, one of these guys over this last couple of years will swing by my office, crack open the door and go, you are on my wife's good list. And I'm like, oh, so the stuff that we're talking about, like, is making it outside of your work leadership life and into your home. They're like, yeah. And my wife's pretty pleased about it because I'm not blowing up all the time anymore, right? And you're like, okay, that's great. I had another moment in one of these meetings recently where some guys were looking at me and they're like, they had all this relationship turmoil in their team dynamic, and all of a sudden they were like really getting along and enjoying working with each other. And they looked at me and they go, hey, why does this stuff work? And I looked at them and I go, do you want my corporate answer or my honest answer? And they're like, no, give us like the real one. And I go, oh, because I'm teaching you the things that Jesus has said are true of the world. I'm teaching you that forgiveness is actually a really bad way to live in relationship with others. And when you start forgiving each other, you're doing something deeply spiritual. And so like, we're not just doing leadership. This has to do with every part of your life. And they're just like, I knew it. You're still a pastor. I'm like, gotcha. But here's the thing, when God places you somewhere, he has plans not just for you in that place, but for the people that he puts around you. Because he loves them. But you don't get to live life that way without spiritual resistance. That's the truth of the matter. Like anytime that you go, I'm going to let God use me in the place that he put me, and he can do whatever he wants with my life, there is spiritual resistance to that. And we see this in Joseph's story. Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man, so he's ripped. Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully and said, come sleep with me. She demanded it. But Joseph refused and said, look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire house. No one here has more authority than I do, and he's held back nothing from me except you because you're his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be sinful against God. Here's something really important for us not to miss. Like this is something that God has done in the way that Joseph looks at the world. Joseph looks at his relationships now as really being a matter not between whether the people around him are broken or doing what they should. Well, if they would just, then my relationship with them would just be great. Have you ever had this moment? If they would change, we wouldn't have problems, right? Joseph looks at his relational world as actually not being a matter between him and people. He looks at it as being between him and God. Yeah. He believes that the responsibilities he's been entrusted with are not ultimately to Potiphar, but the responsibilities God gave him. And he needs to do his work like God entrusted him with that work to do. He believes that his sexuality is a matter that's between him and God. And that even if he could get away with this broken thing and nobody would ever know, and it would be so easy to do, what I do with that place in my life is like between me and God. He sees the world this way. There's like, you remember on Mother's Day, Brooke, my wife, talked about your public self, like the self you show everybody, your private self, the self that like the people close to you know about, and your secret self. Like the part that only you and God know about. It's like Joseph has started to learn integrity looks like being the same in all those places. He couldn't do this thing that Potiphar's wife is asking for because he knows it doesn't matter if it's hidden, it's real, and God and I would know. How beautiful would life look how beautiful would it be if God integrated the places of our life and we didn't have to keep track of who we were in public or private or secret? This is the kind of thing God loves doing. It's the thing we see unfold throughout his story and Judah's story. Verse 10, so she kept putting pressure on him day after day, and he refused to sleep with her. So he just kept out of her way as much as possible. And one day, when no one else was around, he went in to do his work, and she came and grabbed him by the cloak, demanding, come sleep with me. And Joseph tore himself away, but left his cloak in her hands and ran from the house. Here's the thing. When you start to realize that it is a gift in life to be the same in public, in private, and in secret, you don't throw it away. And if something threatens that, you don't just sort of flirt with it, you run. Because you know that there's not any life to be found in that place where you're different people. It's a pain to navigate all that. It creates brokenness in our life and the life of other people. But here's the thing. The outcome of integrity doesn't go great circumstantially for Joseph. We read this. She keeps the cloak until her husband comes home, and she tells him her story. The Hebrew slave you brought into our house tried to come in and fool around with me, she said. But when I screamed, he ran outside and left this cloak here. Here's the thing. I've found this to be true over the course of time in my life. Just because you choose integrity in some place of life does not mean that people will always be honest about who you are. Your reputation, you don't have complete control over your reputation. All you have control over is who you are and the choices that you make. And I've experienced this before in my life, and probably so have you guys at some point or another, where you choose like a path of integrity and then you're not understood by people around you, or maybe to hide something broken that they did, they sort of shift blame onto you. Here's the thing, God does not promise that in a life with him, everyone's going to like us, everyone's going to treat us great, and the curve of our life is just going to be up and to the right forever. He doesn't promise that in a life with him. But we have these choices of who we are and whether or not we let God in to make us people of integrity. Verse 19 says this, Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph treated her. So he took Joseph and threw him in prison where the king's prisoners were held and where he remained. And then listen to this. Tell me if this sounds like God's getting up to something. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. So the Lord's with him. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. So his favors with him. And before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. So he's back in a place of responsibility. And the warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything and the Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. Sounds an awful lot like what Potiphar experienced, right? The thing about integrity, the thing about character, when God works it out in us, is that the person that we are shows up wherever we go, and we're useful to God in whatever place we find ourselves. That's the gift of letting God change the deep stuff, the character stuff in us, and not being so focused on the calling and the finish line that we just want to skip all the steps to get there. It's like when we let the character get formed along the way, we're useful to God at every place, and he starts to repeat these patterns of how he likes to use us. The Lord's with him in prison, and he finds himself in this place where he never would have imagined prison when he's having dreams of the sun, moon, stars bowing down to him. And that's our cliffhanger for this week.
Thanks for listening this week. If you are looking for ways to serve, give, or get connected, go to vkcwest.com.